Hello everyone, I wanted to talk a little bit about this set of rules that I picked up at Warfare a couple of months ago. Give you my impression of it, which unfortunately is quite negative. The reason I purchased these rules was that I spotted on the Caliber books stand this supplement for the rules here, which deals with the Mughal and Maratha wars in the 17th and early 18th centuries. And this, you may know, is a period that interests me, and I'm slowly building up some armies. Haven't got enough yet to put a game on specifically for this period, but it really caught my eye, this book. You don't see many war games rules dealing with this period. It's not a common subject for war gamers to play, and it seems, looking at it, full of detail, full of scenarios, full of nice eye candy. It's worth picking up just for that alone, really, the illustrations and the pictures in here. But it's only really a scenario booklet. It doesn't contain any of the rules, so if I were to play this at some stage in the future, I would need the original set of rules, so I purchased those as well. And I thought I would, as I have a fair number, not a considerable number, a fair number of figures for the Indian Mutiny, I thought I could try the rules out using my Indian Mutiny figures, and I would put a little, maybe a little back rep up on my channel or something like that. And I've really struggled with these rules to actually get going with them. So I just really want to explain. I put some figures out on the table and was beginning to try the rules out after a long period of preparation, studying the rules, trying to understand them. And I abandoned it very swiftly. I just couldn't fathom the rules in my own head to understand how they worked, and I think that's partly because they're quite vague in a lot of places, and there are a lot of gaps, things that you really need to have explained in order for the, to be able to work your way through each turn and understand what you're supposed to do. I mean, I don't expect war games rules to be spoon-fed to me. I'm not, totally stupid, and I can work out some things, and the meaning of wording of rules and so on. But this was something else. This seemed to me that there were a lot of gaps in the explanation that left it up to the player to basically invent how they should proceed. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit in here, because the first thing that I had to really negotiate was that the game, it's dice driven mainly, but you have these cards that you do require. They are they're sort of an integral part of the game. They make the game a lot more. They put a lot more variance into the game. They give it flavour and episodes, and they do add another element to the actual strategies of the player. So I like cards in games. I play a lot of games that involve the use of cards. The numerous really: Congo, Jugular, Soldiers of God, Soldiers of Rome, Soldiers of Napoleon, and many more. Um, I do think though, and I can appreciate that this isn't a massive publishing house or publishing firm. I'm not really even sure who actually published this. Uh, Partisan Press, so it's part of the sort of Caliver Books domain. I appreciate that a lot of the smaller publications can't go to that additional expense of printing playing cards that they sell alongside their rules. So you do get a lot of rule sets where the cards are just displayed in the book, and it's up to you to create your cards. Now, the normal way of doing that would be either, if you're lucky, you might get like a website where there's a PDF version. So, good example of that is Strength and Honor, which has cards in the book similar to this, but better than this. Or they have a PDF version of the rules you can buy, so you can print those pages out and then use those prints as the cards that you're playing with. You can't actually do that with these pages, though. I mean, they haven't got a PDF version, but you can't use these pages as the cards per se by cutting them out of the book, and that's because there are different cards printed on each side of the page. So you see there now there's a card there described as pay no heed. On the corresponding reverse, there's another playing card called clean as a whistle. So your only option now is to photocopy these pages and then print them out. I tried doing that, but it's very scruffy and untidy. And you have to really almost break the spine of the book to get it flat against the plate of the photocopier. It's a way of doing it, but it's a bit cumbersome and not terribly satisfactory. So then I thought I would go to my previous idea for printing tokens and markers out, because a lot of these cards are actually almost like tokens that you put down on the table. So you have to put them against the units that you're playing them on. So they do become a little bit like playing tokens. So you might have seen a previous video that I made where I printed a lot of tokens for the game General Dame. So I did that. I've got lots and lots of these. Let's put them against the background of the table. You can see. So I printed a lot of these on my 3D printer. Refer back to my earlier video on how I did this if you want to know, because you can use this for all kinds of games, and I think it's a very attractive way of putting a lot of the table litter down, without it looking too intrusive. So basically, I was up and running then. I had all those cards represented in a form of tokens that I could put on the table, and basically I can keep them in a bag and draw them blind out of the bag as I need to play them in the game, rather than having a pack of cards that you just draw a card from the deck. The next thing that struck me, though, and may have struck you already, is that the game cards are for the British. So it's basically, because of the period it's wargaming India between 1798 and 1859. It's the concept is that you are playing a British or East India Company force against a native force. Fair enough. But what will you do, or what will I do, when I get around to playing some of the scenarios from this supplement? Because there aren't any British forces. I don't think there are. Maybe there are in some of them, but in the main, these are wars between two opposing native Indian sides. The only solution to that I can see is that you need to print another set of the native side. That is necessary because the cards are different. It is sort of well conceived in that respect, that you have cards that the British can play, which wouldn't work if the native Indian side were to play them. For instance, there's two cards there that you play against the enemy. One is poor fire discipline and the other is appalling fire discipline. Now, the equivalent cards for the native force are... There's only one, poor fire discipline, and that's because the British they can't descend to appalling fire discipline because they were better trained and so on. So they can never go down to that appalling level of fire discipline. So it's well worked out in that respect. But as I say, what do you do when you have two native forces fighting against one another? You have to have yet another set of cards. Look how many there are. That's just one side. So it's all becoming a little bit arduous even before you get going with the game. Right, now the game itself, when you start to read the rules, work out it at first glance and on first reading, it does seem like, oh yeah, I can get my head around this. It's sort of fairly conventional. You have tables for movement, tables for firing, tables for melee, and so on. So it kind of, if you're a seasoned wargamer, then it's all gonna be in a language that you can understand and work with. But get into the nitty gritty, and you begin to realise that there is an awful lot kind of missing. So you have a sort of standard opening couple of paragraphs explaining the turn sequence here. Now, to me, a turn sequence is explaining the structure of the turn, breaking it down into phases where you might have an orders phase, a movement phase, a firing phase, a melee phase, and so on. That's not actually what this paragraph or two explains. It just basically tells you the order in which you have commanders on the table, and it explains the order in which you activate those commanders, and the commanders then give commands to the units that they are commanding, but it doesn't tell you what those commands basically are. It's basically telling you that each commander has to take it in turns to be activated. So you can either do that by having cards for them here that you pick randomly, so you will activate that commander when you draw that card, or in my case when you pull the token out of the bag, or you can do it by giving them initiative, so the ones with the highest initiative work first. That's straightforward enough, but it doesn't actually tell you what the turn sequence is. You immediately go into an explanation of how the actions, so a good commander, for instance, can give 4 orders to 4 different units, or remove terror markers from 4 different units, or a mixture of both. If he was an inspired commander, he could do that with 6 units. If he was a useless commander, he could only do it with 1. So fair enough, but what are those commands? You go straight into the various rules for various actions. So presumably, it makes sense that those commands are these different movements. Fair enough. Okay, so that's just all a little bit woolly. Should have been really explained, I think, in what the turn sequence is about, rather than just throwing you straight into it. So movement is makes sense. As I say, I've abandoned the game virtually that I was trying these rules out with virtually as soon as I started, but I was able to move the figures around successfully. But I immediately, when I decided that was I had done with the first commander, whose token I had pulled out of the bag, then I thought, well, does the commander move? How does the commander move? Does he move at the end of his turn? It would make, lots of rules, that's what happens. It would make sense, but there is no there is no actual mention of how far. As far as I can see, I've gone through these rules so many times now, I haven't found a sentence or a description telling you how to move a commander, how much they can move, whether they do all move at the same rate, or whether I've got a commander on an elephant, does he move at the same rate as a commander that I've got on horseback, or another commander that I got on foot. I don't know, I can't tell. And then it struck me immediately, as soon as I'd done that there are circumstances where the commander, if the commander is killed, you can generate new commanders. So in the event of a battlefield death, then a replacement commander should always be generated using the following table. So they're moving about somehow. They can be killed somehow. It made me wonder, should you actually apportion them, assign them to a particular unit to be moving around, so they are within that unit? Otherwise, how do they get killed? There is no description of how a commander can be killed if he is fired at, or if he is involved in a melee in a unit and dies or something like that. There's no way of specifically targeting a commander, and no explanation of whether they should belong to a unit or not. And this example scenario that they have got doesn't, it tells you that it gives you a breakdown as an order of battle, and a breakdown and a description, say, of the rebel relief force under Tantia Topi here, who is a good rated commander. But he has got 7 different units in that relief force. Doesn't tell you that he needs to be integrated into any of those units. And in a way, it doesn't make sense that he should. As I say, one of my commanders is on an elephant, and that's a perfectly reasonable thing to represent on the table. They've even got a photograph in here, which hopefully, there he is. That's the exact same model from Wargames Foundry that I have of a commander. Are you supposed to put that model within the formation of one of those units? Maybe you are, maybe you're not, but it doesn't tell you. And if he is within a unit, then you have all these sort of tables telling you how to kill. Basically, there are no circumstances in here in which you roll to see if the commander has been killed within that unit. So you're beginning to have to bring in concepts from other games that you might be familiar with. So, for instance, something like Black Powder or Hail Caesar, where the commanders can actually, I think they can in Black Powder, they certainly can in Hail Caesar, where they join a unit and take part in the fighting and bolster the fighting abilities of the unit that they're actually connected to at that particular time. There's nothing of that in here, so all very vague and woolly. And I really do think that there is a lot of gloss. In particular with that scenario book, as I say, a lot of eye candy in it, a lot of lovely pictures, a lot of inspiration, but it's so frustrating that you can't get to grips with what you are supposed to do. I think another thing I would just mention, while I think that is more or less my total criticism of these rules, but I will just give you another example of where this is so vague, and it's in the firing pages telling you how to fire with units. So here you have a small arms table, and here you have an example. So if you can't read it, because it might be a little bit too distant from the page, I'll read this example to you. A native infantry unit of 10 figures wants to fire at a target in the open. The infantry are armed with matchlocks. The distance is measured and it is 9 inches. This is in range. It counts as medium range as it is over 7 inches but less than 11 inches, in brackets long range. When the player rolls, he will throw 10 hit dice, 1 per man. Okay, so on first glance it's perfectly understandable sentence, but look over here in this small arms table. So remember, the range of the matchlocks was 9 inches. Here you have the line for matchlocks. Medium range 7 inches, long range 11 inches. So it's between 7 and 11 inches, so you would read it as medium. But does that mean, if you look at the rest of the table, that extreme range is over 14 inches? Because if medium range is over 7 inches, long range must be over 11 inches, and therefore extreme range is over 14 inches. That means that any range over 14 inches is extreme. That might be the case. It might be the case you can fire from one end of the table to the other, but you've got a lot of penalties to your dice roll doing it. But it is still possible to hit something 6 feet away at the other end of the table if you read it like that. But then go to the earlier part of the table and you have the same issue, kind of almost the opposite situation though, because if the ranges are over those distances, that means that point blank range must be over 2 inches. what does that mean? Does it mean that you can't shoot at something that's below 2 inches? Surely that should just be, no figure at all. I don't know. It just doesn't. The table doesn't work. You can't have it both ways. Medium range. Normally, I would read a table like that. If I hadn't read that description there, I would have said medium range is over 3 inches and up to 7 inches. And extreme range is over 11 and up to 14. That's not the case. It's over 7 inches. So point blank range has to be over 2 inches. Why they just didn't say up to 3 inches, I don't know. It's all very imprecise and unclear. There are a few other things in here, but I think that's basically my point about these rules. Is they're very disappointing because it looks lovely. When you first flick through, there's lots to lots of a lot of tables, lots of rules there that seem to be quite specific and detailed, but when you get down to the nitty gritty, there are so many gaps and so many vagaries, and maybe there is a good game to be got out of these rules if I were to persevere, but it's not, to me, it's not worth the effort. I'd much rather play a game like The Men Who Would Be Kings, even though that is a lot more generic and not specific to a particular conflict. It's basically colonial warfare in general, but you can add nuances to the rules. Excuse me. There are army lists and so on that you can select from the back of the rules. So I'm abandoning these rules, and I'm just going to have this lovely scenario book as giving me ideas for future battles using another set of rules. So yeah, it's great shame. I know it's not very popular on my channel if I am too negative about things, and people don't really like to listen to criticism, but at the same time, if like me you are interested in colonial warfare, you're interested in rules to use for your Indian mutiny figures or whatever, then you're going to be tempted by this, and my advice would be to avoid the temptation. So I hope I've given you sort of cogent reasons for doing so, and I'm not just ranting about something that being totally negative about it, when in fact it has got some value in there. I really don't think these rules are up to scratch. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Bye for now. Yeah, sorry, there was one other thing, just one other example that did sort of frustrate me, and it sort of relates back to a lot of the other things that I was talking about. So if you are basically you have to draw some of the cards at random at the beginning of the game, and depending on the quality of your senior commander, it's a different number of cards. So a good commander starts the game with 2 cards per side. Once those cards are spent, you can generate further cards, so you can draw other cards from the pack. One of the ways that you do that is by pushing a unit back in melee, for instance. That would give you No, I won't be able to find it, but basically there are a number of ways where you can generate fresh cards. One of them is to push the enemy back in melee, another is to kill the... Yeah, here we go. One card drawn if an enemy unit is pushed back in melee. One card is drawn if an enemy unit is forced to fall back, either retreat or rout. Two cards are drawn if an enemy unit is destroyed or surrenders, and two cards are drawn if an enemy commander is killed. So that takes me back to that same thing about how you need to know how to kill an enemy commander, and it's just not explained. But anyway, I started my game with two cards drawn for each side. I've actually managed... Oh no, here they are. I was going to say I managed to lose them, but these, I kept them aside to show you the two cards that I picked for each side. So the native side picked two, or didn't pick them, they drew two cards that were both to be played against the enemy. The British side drew two cards, one of which was to be played, could be played against the enemy. And basically what you're supposed to do is play the cards at the start of the turn before you've activated any of the commanders and any of the units. Okay, so one of the cards that the British had drawn was Hit the Powder, which is basically a kind of a very effective strike on the enemy artillery, but the enemy didn't have any artillery, so that card was completely useless. A useless draw at the beginning. So the British were then down to one other card, and it was play against the enemy, confound it, and that allowed you to select two cards at random from the enemy player's hand and remove them. So they immediately withdrew the native cards before they had any chance to play them. So I was basically playing the game at the start without any cards of any use in either player's hand. Yeah, that says it already. Once again, sorry to carry on ranting, and thanks for watching.